To make a living, a beggar agrees to take care of a millionaire in a vegetative state, but what happens next will give you chills. The biting Greenland wind whistled through the narrow mountain pass as Oliver Montgomery's Range Rover navigated the treacherous road. His fiancée, Victoria Blackwood, sat beside him, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her leather handbag. The couple had embarked on this journey to celebrate their engagement, though Oliver's true motivation lay in scouting locations for his next philanthropic venture, a rehabilitation center for underprivileged youth. At 38, Oliver had built an empire from his technological innovations, yet his greatest joy came from his anonymous charitable works. Victoria, a rising social media influencer, had captured his heart with her apparent passion for humanitarian causes, though lately he'd begun to question the authenticity of her commitment. "Darling, must we venture so far into this frozen wasteland?" Victoria's voice carried a note of carefully measured displeasure. The Four Seasons in Reykjavik has a simply divine spa package. Oliver's steel-grey eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. "This location has potential, Victoria. Imagine the impact we could have here, a place where young people could discover their strength through nature's challenges." Victoria's response was lost in a sudden rush of movement above them. Oliver's trained eye caught the impending danger first, a massive sheet of snow and ice cascading down the mountainside, heading directly toward their vehicle. Without hesitation, he jerked the wheel, positioning the car to shield Victoria from the impact. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of white and grey. The Range Rover rolled, each impact sending shockwaves through Oliver's body. His last conscious thought was of Victoria's scream, high and piercing against the sound of crushing metal. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments: sterile white walls, the rhythmic beeping of machines, voices speaking in hushed tones about extensive damage and limited mobility. Oliver tried to move, to speak, but his body refused to cooperate. The doctor's prognosis was devastating: severe spinal cord injury, partial paralysis, and significant trauma to his nervous system. Victoria's visits became a parade of designer outfits and performative concern. She filled the silence with chatter about social media followers and brand deals, while Oliver remained trapped in his own body, unable to express the turmoil within. The doctors spoke of potential recovery, but the road ahead seemed insurmountable. "We need to consider long-term care options," Victoria announced one afternoon, her voice carrying the rehearsed quality he'd come to recognize. "I've been researching care facilities, but then I had the most brilliant idea. We could hire a private carer, someone to handle all the unpleasant details." Oliver wanted to object, to tell her that what he needed was a partner, not a paid substitute. But his condition limited his communication to small movements and basic signals. He watched as Victoria took his silence as agreement, already scrolling through her phone to make arrangements. The following weeks brought a parade of potential carers, each more qualified and impersonal than the last. Victoria rejected them all, citing trivial concerns about their appearances or backgrounds, until one rainy Tuesday morning, when Emma Clark walked into his room. Emma stood out immediately, not for her credentials, but for her quiet dignity, despite her worn clothes and obvious financial struggles. Her dark curls were pulled back in a practical bun, and her green eyes held a depth of understanding that caught Oliver's attention. Victoria, surprisingly, seemed almost relieved to hire someone who wouldn't overshadow her own carefully curated image. What no one knew then was that Emma's arrival would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything Oliver thought he knew about love, purpose, and the true meaning of healing. Chapter 2: Broken Walls. Emma Clark's first day as Oliver Montgomery's carer began with a storm, both literal and metaphorical. Her 14-year-old daughter, Sophie, had faced another difficult morning at school, where her status as the daughter of a homeless woman made her a target for cruel jokes and exclusion. "You don't have to take this job, Mum," Sophie had whispered that morning, her school uniform slightly too short after a recent growth spurt. "We can manage in the shelter a bit longer." But Emma knew better. The temporary accommodation they'd secured at the women's shelter was coming to an end, and this position offered not just a salary, but accommodation in the staff quarters of Oliver's mansion. It was an opportunity they couldn't afford to refuse. The mansion itself was a testament to Oliver's success, a Victorian masterpiece nestled in the Hampshire countryside. Emma arrived early, taking in the magnificent structure that would become her workplace and home. Victoria greeted her with a clipboard of instructions and a thinly veiled warning about maintaining professional boundaries. "Mr. Montgomery requires absolute dedication," Victoria stated, her perfectly arranged features showing no genuine emotion. "His condition makes him difficult at times. You'll find all his medical requirements listed here, along with emergency contacts and dietary restrictions." Emma nodded, already noting the distance in Victoria's voice when she spoke about her fiancé. The younger woman seemed more concerned with maintaining appearances than providing actual support to her injured partner. Oliver's suite occupied the entire east wing of the mansion's ground floor. Emma found him sitting in his wheelchair by the window, his once athletic frame now rigid with tension. His grey eyes met hers in the reflection, filled with a mixture of resignation and defiance. "Good morning, Mr. Montgomery," Emma began, keeping her voice gentle but matter-of-fact. "I thought we might start by reviewing your physiotherapy routine together." Oliver's response was a barely perceptible shake of his head. Emma noticed how his fingers twitched against the wheelchair's armrest, a sign of his frustration at his limited communication. "I understand your reluctance," she continued, moving to face him. "But I learned quite a bit about physiotherapy from my mother. She believed in combining traditional techniques with emotional healing. Would you be willing to try something different?" The mention of her mother's influence sparked something in Oliver's eyes, the first genuine interest she'd seen. Emma began explaining her approach, demonstrating gentle stretching techniques while sharing stories about her mother's work with injured veterans. As she worked, Emma noticed details about Oliver that his medical charts hadn't captured, the way his eyes followed movements in the garden outside, how his breathing changed when she mentioned art therapy, the collection of architectural magazines hidden beneath medical journals on his bedside table. Their first breakthrough came unexpectedly. While demonstrating a hand exercise, Emma accidentally knocked over a stack of papers. Among them was a sketch, beautiful and precise, of a building design. Oliver's eyes widened in panic, but Emma simply picked it up and studied it with genuine appreciation. "This is remarkable," she said softly. "The integration of natural light with the structural elements. Was architecture your passion before?" Oliver managed a slight nod, and for the first time, Emma saw a glimmer of something beyond pain in his expression. She spent the next hour showing him various hand-strengthening exercises that could help him regain some drawing ability, no matter how limited. That evening, as Emma settled Sophie into their new quarters, her daughter noticed something different about her mother. "You seem hopeful, Mum," Sophie observed, unpacking her few belongings. Emma smiled, thinking of the small victory she'd achieved that day. "Sometimes, Sophie, the strongest people are the ones who need the most gentle handling. Mr. Montgomery reminds me of the butterfly your class raised last term. You can't rush the emergence from the cocoon, or you'll damage the wings." What Emma didn't say was how much she recognized in Oliver's eyes, the same determination she'd seen in her own reflection during their darkest days on the streets. It was the look of someone who hadn't given up, just forgotten how to begin again. Chapter 3. Hidden Talents. The autumn rain painted streaks across the mansion's windows as Sophie wandered through its vast corridors after school. 3 weeks had passed since she and her mother had moved into the staff quarters, and she'd gradually begun to find comfort in the building's quiet grandeur. Today, however, she carried a weight heavier than her school bag, another day of subtle jabs and exclusion from her classmates. She found herself drawn to Oliver's wing, where she often heard her mother's gentle voice mixing with classical music during their therapy sessions. The door was ajar, and she glimpsed Oliver alone, struggling with a pencil, his frustration evident in the tension of his shoulders. "Mr. Montgomery." Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper. "Would you like some help?" Oliver's eyes met hers, surprised but not unwelcoming. Sophie approached cautiously, noting the architectural sketch he was attempting to modify. Without waiting for permission, she pulled up a chair. "Mum says you're an architect. We're studying technical drawing in art class," she offered, reaching for a spare pencil. "Maybe we could practice together." A subtle shift in Oliver's expression, something between amusement and curiosity, gave her the courage to continue. Sophie began sharing her own struggles with perspective drawing, demonstrating what she'd learned in class. To her surprise, Oliver managed to make small adjustments to her technique, using his limited mobility. When Emma returned from preparing Oliver's medications, she found them absorbed in their impromptu art lesson. Sophie was chattering about her art teacher's passion for Gothic architecture, while Oliver used small hand movements to indicate corrections to her drawing. "Sophie," Emma started, concerned about overstepping boundaries, but Oliver's expression stopped her. There was a lightness in his features she hadn't seen before. That evening, Victoria swept in for her weekly visit, designer handbag swinging. She paused at the sight of Sophie's drawings scattered across Oliver's desk. "What's all this?" she asked, her tone carrying a note of displeasure. "Sophie's been helping Mr. Montgomery with his physiotherapy through art," Emma explained, watching Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers gather the papers with barely concealed disdain. "How quaint," Victoria replied. "Though I hardly think child's play qualifies as proper therapy. Oliver needs professional rehabilitation, not amateur hour." Sophie, who had entered with fresh water for Oliver's medications, froze in the doorway. Oliver's monitor began beeping more rapidly, his hands clenching in obvious distress. Emma stepped forward, her voice firm but professional. "Art therapy is a recognized form of rehabilitation, Miss Blackwood, and Sophie's presence has had a positive effect on Mr. Montgomery's progress." Victoria's response was cut short by a sharp sound from Oliver, the closest to a voice they'd heard from him. His eyes were fixed on Sophie's drawings, then on Victoria, his meaning clear. Later that night, Emma found Sophie in their quarters, sketching furiously in her notebook. "He defended me, Mum," Sophie said without looking up. "No one except you has ever done that before." Emma sat beside her daughter, noting the careful architectural lines taking shape on the page. "Sometimes people surprise us, love. Mr. Montgomery sees something in you that others at school are too blind to notice." What Emma didn't mention was how Oliver's reaction had revealed something crucial. His mind was as sharp as ever, trapped though it was in an uncooperative body. She'd noticed how his eyes followed their conversations, how he responded to complex ideas, despite his limited ability to communicate. As she helped Sophie prepare for bed, Emma's thoughts turned to the locked room she'd glimpsed at the end of Oliver's wing. Victoria had brushed off her questions about it, claiming it contained just old business papers. But Emma had seen Oliver's gaze drift to that door during their therapy sessions, carrying a weight of unspoken meaning. That night, as the mansion settled into silence, Emma made a decision. Understanding Oliver's past might be the key to unlocking his future. Tomorrow she would find a way into that room, hoping it might hold the answers they needed to break through the remaining walls between them. Chapter 4. Paper Trails. The locked room yielded its secrets on a quiet Sunday morning when Victoria was away at a charity brunch. Emma had discovered the key hidden behind a loose panel in Oliver's desk, a discovery made while cleaning, or so she told herself to ease her conscience. The room itself was a revelation. So unlike the sterile medical environment that now dominated Oliver's wing, this space breathed with life and purpose. Architectural drawings covered the walls, but it was the filing cabinet in the corner that caught Emma's attention. Inside, she found folders filled with documentation of anonymous donations, carefully planned charitable projects, and correspondence with various humanitarian organizations. Each folder told a story of lives changed through Oliver's quiet generosity. A women's shelter in Manchester, a youth rehabilitation centre in Glasgow, a medical clinic in Leeds. All funded anonymously, all managed through a complex network of shell companies designed to keep his involvement hidden. Emma's hands trembled as she read through the papers. The Oliver Montgomery she'd come to know through these documents was a far cry from the tech millionaire portrayed in the press. He was something else entirely, a silent guardian for those society had forgotten. A soft sound at the doorway made her turn. Oliver sat in his wheelchair, watching her with an unreadable expression. Instead of guilt, Emma felt a surge of understanding. "This is why you were in Greenland, wasn't it?" she asked softly. "You weren't just on holiday. You were planning another project." Oliver's slight nod confirmed her suspicion. Emma moved to kneel beside his wheelchair, spreading out the documents she'd found. "These they're extraordinary, but why keep them secret?" Using their developed system of communication, blinks and small hand movements, Oliver managed to convey his message. True charity, he believed, shouldn't be about recognition. Their moment of understanding was interrupted by Sophie's arrival. She burst into the room, excitement radiating from her face, only to stop short at the sight of the papers strewn across the floor. "Mum, I've been looking everywhere for you. I wanted to show you my new drawing, but—" Her voice trailed off as she took in the room's contents. "What is all this?" Emma glanced at Oliver, who gave a slight nod of permission. As they showed Sophie the documents, explaining Oliver's secret philanthropic work, the young girl's eyes grew wide with understanding. "That's why you were interested in my drawings of the youth center," Sophie realized. "You're planning to build one yourself, aren't you?" Oliver's expression softened, and he managed to move his hand toward a particular folder. Inside, they found preliminary plans for a combined arts and rehabilitation center designed to provide therapy and creative outlets for young people facing physical and emotional challenges. The discovery sparked something in Sophie. She pulled out her sketchbook, showing Oliver her latest drawings, designs for a community art space she'd imagined during her lonely lunches at school. Maybe we could combine our ideas," she suggested tentatively. As Emma watched them pore over the drawings together, she realized they'd crossed a threshold. The locked room had revealed more than just Oliver's past. It had given them a glimpse of a possible future. That evening, as Emma updated Oliver's medical charts, she noticed subtle improvements in his condition. His hand coordination had shown marked progress, and his ability to maintain focus had increased significantly. She wondered if having a sense of purpose again was proving to be its own form of therapy. However, their peaceful moment of discovery was about to be shattered. Emma didn't know it yet, but Victoria had left the charity brunch early, and she was already on her way back to the mansion. In her designer handbag was a document that would threaten everything they'd begun to build, a legal petition for control of Oliver's estate. Chapter 5. Storm Clouds. Victoria's heels clicked against the marble floors of the mansion with military precision. The legal documents in her handbag felt heavy with purpose as she made her way to Oliver's wing. She'd spent weeks preparing this move, consulting with lawyers who specialized in cases involving diminished capacity. The scene she encountered stopped her in her tracks. Oliver sat in his wheelchair by the window, Sophie perched beside him with a sketchbook, while Emma adjusted his physical therapy equipment. The three of them formed a tableau of domestic tranquility that made Victoria's perfectly painted lips twist into a frown. "Oliver, darling," she announced her presence with practiced sweetness, "I need to discuss something rather important with you, in private." Emma caught the underlying steel in Victoria's tone. She gathered Sophie and their materials, but Oliver's hand movement stopped them. His meaning was clear. He wanted them to stay. Victoria's composure slipped for just a moment before she recovered. "Very well," she said, pulling out the legal papers. "Perhaps it's better to have witnesses. These documents are for your protection, darling. Given your condition, the lawyers agree it would be best if I assumed control of your financial affairs." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Emma watched as Oliver's fingers tightened on his wheelchair's armrest, his jaw clenching with suppressed emotion. "The petition gives me authority to manage your estate and make decisions regarding your care," Victoria continued, spreading the papers on the table. "It's really for the best, darling. You're in no condition to handle such complex matters." Sophie, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "But Mr. Montgomery's been making decisions. He's been helping me with my drawings, and we're planning—" "Sophie," Emma warned quietly, but the damage was done. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Planning? What exactly have you been planning?" Her gaze swept the room, landing on the partially opened door to the formerly locked room. With quick strides, she crossed the space and pushed the door fully open, taking in the exposed documents and drawings. "So this is what you've been doing," she said, her voice dangerously soft, "filling his head with childish projects while going through his private papers. How very convenient for you, Emma, to discover my fiancé's charitable side. I wonder what else you've discovered. Perhaps his banking details." "Investment portfolios?" Emma stepped forward, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Those accusations are completely unfounded, Miss Blackwood. We've been focusing on Mr. Montgomery's rehabilitation, which includes engaging his mind as well as his body." "Rehabilitation?" Victoria laughed, the sound brittle. "Let's be realistic. Oliver will never return to his former self. These little art therapy sessions and secret projects are just giving him false hope. The doctors were quite clear about his prognosis." Oliver's medical monitor began beeping rapidly, reflecting his agitation. Emma moved to check his vitals, but Victoria intercepted her. "Don't touch him," Victoria snapped. "In fact, consider this your notice. I'll be arranging for professional care at a private facility. Your services are no longer required." The tension in the room was broken by a sudden crash. Oliver had swept the legal documents off the table with a jerky but deliberate movement of his arm. His eyes blazed with an intensity that made Victoria step back. "Mr. Montgomery appears to have an opinion on the matter," Emma observed quietly. Victoria gathered the scattered papers, her composure cracking. "This isn't over. Oliver needs proper care, not whatever game you're playing. I'll return with the lawyers tomorrow. We'll see how well your cozy little arrangement holds up under legal scrutiny." After Victoria stormed out, Sophie burst into tears. "We can't leave, Mum. Mr. Montgomery needs us." Emma knelt beside Oliver's wheelchair, noting the mixture of fury and fear in his eyes. "We're not going anywhere," she assured them both. "If Miss Blackwood wants a legal battle, she'll find we have quite a story to tell about patient autonomy and rehabilitation progress." What Emma didn't say was how precarious their position truly was. Victoria had wealth, connections, and the presumption of authority as Oliver's fiancée. Their only hope lay in proving Oliver was capable of making his own decisions and in finding a way to give him back his voice before Victoria returned with her lawyers. Chapter 6. Breaking Through. The night after Victoria's ultimatum stretched endlessly before them, Emma had put Sophie to bed with promises that everything would work out, though her own mind raced with contingency plans. She returned to Oliver's wing, finding him still awake, his eyes fixed on the rain-streaked windows. "We need to try something different," Emma announced, pulling up a chair beside him. "The doctors focused on physical therapy, but I've been researching alternative communication methods. There's a technique my mother used with patients who had similar conditions, a combination of muscle memory exercises and speech therapy." Oliver's eyes met hers, questioning but hopeful. Emma began explaining her idea, demonstrating gentle exercises designed to strengthen the connection between brain and vocal cords. They worked through the night, taking breaks only when Oliver's fatigue became evident. Around midnight, Sophie appeared in her pajamas, unable to sleep. Instead of sending her back to bed, Emma incorporated her into their session. Sophie began reading aloud from Oliver's architectural magazines, giving him specific words to focus on. The breakthrough came in the early hours of the morning. Sophie was describing one of their shared designs for the youth center when Oliver managed to produce a sound, rough and barely audible, but unmistakably an attempt at speech. Emma and Sophie froze, hardly daring to breathe. Oliver's face contorted with effort, and then it happened again. This time they could make out what he was trying to say. "Stay." Sophie burst into tears of joy, while Emma fought to maintain her professional composure. "Again," she encouraged gently. "You can do this, Mr. Montgomery." For the next hour they worked with renewed determination. Each attempted word seemed to strengthen Oliver's confidence. By dawn, he could manage several basic words, though the effort clearly exhausted him. As the sun rose, Emma sent Sophie to get ready for school, promising to continue the sessions later. Once they were alone, Oliver fixed Emma with an intense gaze and struggled to form new words. "Trust you." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. "I know you do, and I promise we'll fight Victoria's petition. The Oliver Montgomery I've come to know over these past weeks isn't someone who needs others to make his decisions for him." Oliver's hand moved slightly, catching her wrist. The touch sent an unexpected current through Emma's arm, making her suddenly aware of how close they'd grown during their night of intensive therapy. She quickly stood up, professional mask sliding back into place. "You should rest now," she said, adjusting his pillows. "We'll need to pace ourselves with the speech therapy, but this is incredible progress. Victoria's lawyers won't be able to ignore this." As she turned to leave, Oliver managed another word. "Emma." She paused at the door, looking back. His eyes held something that made her heart skip, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Jenkins, Oliver's long-serving butler. His usually impassive face showed signs of worry as he handed Emma an envelope. "This arrived by courier this morning," he explained. "Miss Blackwood's lawyers have scheduled an emergency competency hearing for tomorrow afternoon. They're bringing in specialists to evaluate Mr. Montgomery's condition. Emma's heart sank as she read the legal notice. They had less than 36 hours to prepare their defense, but as she looked back at Oliver, seeing the determination in his face, she felt a surge of hope. They had something Victoria and her lawyers hadn't counted on: Oliver's renewed ability to communicate, however limited. What troubled Emma more was the growing realization that her feelings for Oliver had shifted into dangerous territory. She'd promised herself when taking this job that she wouldn't let her heart complicate matters. She had Sophie to think about, and Oliver was still technically engaged to Victoria. Yet as she watched him doze off, exhausted from their breakthrough session, Emma couldn't deny the truth any longer. Somewhere between the physiotherapy sessions, art lessons with Sophie, and this night of intense connection, she'd fallen in love with Oliver Montgomery. And that realization made their upcoming legal battle far more complicated than she'd ever anticipated. Chapter 7. The Hearing. The London law offices of Blackwood & Associates towered above the city, its glass facade reflecting the grey autumn sky. Emma couldn't help but notice that Victoria's surname matched the firm's name, another detail her fiancé had conveniently failed to mention. Sophie sat beside her in the waiting area, nervously smoothing her borrowed dress, while Oliver's wheelchair was positioned between them. "Remember," Emma whispered, "we only need to demonstrate that Mr. Montgomery is capable of making his own decisions. The speech therapy progress alone should—" "Miss Clark," a crisp voice interrupted. A secretary gestured toward the conference room. "They're ready for you." The room was intimidating in its opulence. A long mahogany table dominated the space, around which sat Victoria, 3 stern-looking lawyers and 2 medical specialists. Emma noticed how Victoria had positioned herself to catch the light from the window, her designer suit and perfect makeup creating an image of polished concern. "Let the record show that this is an informal competency evaluation for Oliver Montgomery," the lead lawyer began. Present are his fiancée, Miss Victoria Blackwood, medical specialists Dr. Harrison and Dr. Foster, Mr. Montgomery's current carer, Miss Emma Clark, and— He paused, frowning at Sophie. "My daughter is here at Mr. Montgomery's specific request," Emma stated firmly. Oliver's hand moved slightly in confirmation. The first hour was grueling. The specialist fired questions at Emma about Oliver's care routine, his medical progress, and her qualifications. Victoria occasionally interjected with carefully worded concerns about Emma's lack of professional certification. "And these art therapy sessions," Victoria's primary lawyer said, shuffling through his papers. "They seem rather unconventional. No formal training, no structured methodology, just drawing pictures with a child." Sophie straightened in her chair. "Mr. Montgomery has been teaching me about architectural design. He's helped me understand perspective and—" "This isn't an art class review," Victoria cut in smoothly. "We're here to discuss Oliver's capacity to manage his affairs. The doctor's reports clearly indicate severe limitations in his ability to communicate and make complex decisions." "Those reports are outdated," Emma countered, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Mr. Montgomery has made significant progress, particularly in the last 24 hours. If you'll allow him to demonstrate—" "Demonstrate?" Victoria laughed softly. "Emma, dear, I know you mean well, but we must be realistic. Oliver can barely move, let alone communicate complex financial decisions." Oliver's monitor began beeping faster, but this time it wasn't from distress. His eyes focused with intense concentration, and then, in a voice rough from disuse but clear enough to silence the room, he spoke. "My decision." The specialists leaned forward, furiously taking notes. Victoria's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. "Oliver has regained limited speech capabilities," Emma explained into the stunned silence. "It's still difficult and requires great effort, but with continued therapy—" "One word hardly constitutes meaningful communication," Victoria's lawyer interrupted. "And given Miss Clark's obvious emotional investment in this situation, we have to question whether—" "Plans," Oliver forced out another word, his hand moving toward the portfolio Sophie carried. The young girl quickly opened it, revealing the detailed drawings and documents they'd prepared. For the next 30 minutes, through a combination of newly recovered speech, hand signals, and Sophie's careful interpretation, Oliver presented his vision for the Youth Rehabilitation Center. The drawings showed a remarkable collaboration between his architectural expertise and Sophie's fresh perspective. More importantly, they demonstrated clear, purposeful thinking and decision-making. Dr. Harrison, one of the specialists, studied the plans with growing interest. These are quite sophisticated designs. The integration of therapeutic spaces with artistic elements shows considerable forethought. Mr. Montgomery, can you explain the reasoning behind the central courtyard design? Oliver worked through the explanations slowly, each word a victory. Emma watched the room's atmosphere shift as Oliver continued to demonstrate not just basic communication, but complex, nuanced thinking. Victoria sat very still, her knuckles white against her designer handbag. When Oliver finished his explanation, she stood abruptly. "I need to confer with my lawyers," she announced, in private. As they filed out, leaving Emma, Sophie, and Oliver alone in the conference room, Sophie squeezed Oliver's hand. "You were brilliant," she whispered. Emma noticed Oliver's exhaustion and moved to check his vitals, her hand brushing against his shoulder. He caught her fingers with a small movement, and their eyes met. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, something that made Emma's heart race for reasons entirely unrelated to the stress of the hearing. What none of them realized was that Victoria, watching through the conference room's glass wall, saw this exchange. Her expression hardened as she turned to her lawyers, pulling a new set of documents from her bag. The hearing wasn't over yet, and Victoria Blackwood had one more card to play. Chapter 8. Revelations. When Victoria returned to the conference room, she carried herself with renewed confidence. Her lawyers distributed new documents to everyone present, their expressions carefully neutral. "While Oliver's progress is certainly impressive," Victoria began, her voice carrying a note of practiced sympathy, "there are other concerns we need to address. Specifically, the matter of Miss Clark's professional conduct." Emma felt her stomach drop as she scanned the documents before her. They were printouts of her employment history, including the gaps when she and Sophie had been homeless, along with financial records showing her desperate circumstances before taking the position with Oliver. "These records paint a concerning picture," Victoria's lawyer continued. "A series of short-term positions, periods of unemployment, no fixed address. Hardly the stable background one would want in a person responsible for a vulnerable patient's care." Sophie's face flushed with shame and anger, but Emma placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "My circumstances before taking this position were difficult, yes, but they have no bearing on the quality of care I've provided." "Perhaps not," Victoria conceded. "But there's more." She produced another document with a flourish. "We've discovered that Miss Clark has been offered a position at the Royal London Rehabilitation Centre, a prestigious role with significant financial benefits. Yet she hasn't informed Mr. Montgomery of this opportunity. One might question her motives for staying, given the obvious advantages of moving on." Oliver's head turned sharply toward Emma, question and hurt evident in his expression. Emma felt her professional composure cracking. "I received the offer 3 weeks ago," she admitted quietly. "I intended to discuss it with Mr. Montgomery once we'd dealt with the more pressing matter of this hearing." "How convenient," Victoria smiled. "And the fact that my fiancé's estate would be worth considerably more than a rehabilitation center salary had nothing to do with your decision to stay." Before Emma could respond, Sophie stood up, her voice trembling but clear. "You don't know anything about us. My mum works harder than anyone I've ever met. She learned all those therapy techniques because she spent every free moment at the library studying while I did my homework. She takes extra shifts at the cafe near my school just so I can have proper uniforms. She's not after anyone's money." "Sophie, please," Emma tried to interrupt, but her daughter wasn't finished. "And you want to know why she didn't take that job? Because she couldn't bear the thought of leaving Mr. Montgomery with someone who might treat him like he's broken. She sees him as a person, not a project or a bank account." The room fell silent. Oliver's monitor showed elevated readings, but his eyes were clear and focused. With visible effort, he formed words. "Trust Emma, my choice." Victoria's composure slipped. "Oliver, darling, you can't possibly—" "Not yours," Oliver continued, each word deliberate and strong. "No control." Dr. Harrison cleared her throat. "Speaking from a medical perspective, Mr. Montgomery is demonstrating clear decision-making capacity. His choice of care provider, while unconventional, appears to be producing positive results. Furthermore," Dr. Foster added, reviewing his notes, "the progress shown in both physical and speech therapy under Miss Clark's care is remarkable. These results, combined with the evidence of complex project planning we've seen today, suggest Mr. Montgomery is fully capable of managing his own affairs. Victoria stood suddenly, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. This is absurd. Oliver, we had plans. All our social connections, our public image. Image, Oliver repeated, his voice carrying a new strength. All you want. The truth of those words seemed to hang in the air. Victoria looked around the room, at the lawyers who had begun shuffling their papers uncomfortably, at the doctors making notes that would officially declare Oliver competent, at Sophie, who met her gaze without flinching. Finally, she looked at Emma, who sat quietly beside Oliver, her hand still resting protectively near his on the wheelchair's armrest. In that moment, Victoria saw what she had perhaps known for weeks but refused to acknowledge: the gentle intimacy between them, the trust and understanding that went far beyond a professional relationship. "Well," Victoria said, gathering her handbag with trembling hands, "I suppose that concludes our business here." She paused at the door, her voice dropping to a whisper only Emma could hear. He was never really mine to lose, was he? As Victoria's heels clicked down the hallway for the last time, Emma felt the tension drain from her shoulders. But new questions pressed in. The job offer she'd hidden, the feelings she couldn't deny any longer, the uncertain future ahead of them. Oliver's hand moved slightly, catching her attention. His eyes held no accusation about the hidden job offer, only understanding and something warmer that made her breath catch. "Stay?" he asked, the question carrying more weight than its simple syllable suggested. Emma looked at Sophie, who nodded encouragingly, then back at Oliver. The answer had really been decided weeks ago, in all the small moments that had brought them to this point. "Yes," she said softly, "we'll stay." Chapter 9. New Horizons. The weeks following Victoria's departure brought subtle changes to the mansion. Oliver's wing gradually transformed from its clinical atmosphere into a warm, creative space. Architectural drawings and Sophie's artwork adorned the walls, while the previously locked room became their informal project headquarters. Oliver's speech continued to improve, though he still struggled with longer sentences. His physiotherapy sessions with Emma now incorporated more advanced exercises, and his hand coordination showed remarkable progress. Most evenings found the three of them gathered in his study, working on plans for the Youth Rehabilitation Center. "The Planning Commission meets next month," Emma mentioned one evening, sorting through permit applications. "Jenkins has been invaluable in handling the paperwork, but they'll want to hear from you directly, Oliver." Oliver nodded, determination evident in his expression. "We'll speak," he assured them, his voice stronger than it had been during the hearing. "Show them. Everything." Sophie looked up from her homework, excitement brightening her features. "Could we present the art therapy program too? Sarah from my art class asked about it, and her mum works with troubled youth." The mention of Sophie's classmates brought a smile to Emma's face. The change in their circumstances had affected Sophie's school life dramatically. Her newfound confidence, combined with her emerging artistic talents, had begun to earn her genuine friendships. "Of course," Oliver managed, his eyes warming as he watched Sophie sketch. The girl had become more than just his carer's daughter. She was his student, his inspiration, and in many ways, the bridge that had helped him reconnect with his passion for creating spaces that could change lives. As Sophie became absorbed in her drawing, Emma noticed Oliver watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Since the hearing, something had shifted between them, creating an undercurrent of unspoken feelings that neither had dared to address. A knock at the door interrupted the moment. Jenkins entered, carrying a silver envelope with familiar handwriting. "From Miss Blackwood, sir," he announced, his tone carefully neutral. Emma felt her heart sink as Oliver accepted the envelope. Despite Victoria's dramatic exit from their lives, part of her had feared this wasn't truly over. She watched anxiously as Oliver opened the letter, his expression unreadable. To everyone's surprise, he began to laugh, a rough, unpracticed sound, but genuine. He handed the letter to Emma, who read it aloud. "Dearest Oliver, through recent reflection, I've realized our engagement was built more on mutual convenience than genuine connection. Your accident didn't end our relationship, it merely revealed its superficiality. I've accepted a position with a women's empowerment organization in New York, perhaps helping others find their independence, will teach me something about authentic relationships. The papers enclosed will formally dissolve our engagement and remove my name from any legal documents concerning your estate. I hope you'll find the happiness you deserve with someone who sees you as I never did. With sincere wishes, Victoria. Silence filled the room as the letter's implications sank in. Sophie was the first to speak, her teenage directness cutting through the tension. So, she's actually being nice. Emma studied the legal documents attached to the letter. Everything appeared straightforward, a clean break with no hidden complications. It seems she is, Emma replied somewhat wonderingly. Oliver's hand found hers on the arm of his wheelchair. The touch sent warmth spreading through her fingers, and when their eyes met, the emotions they'd been carefully containing threatened to overflow. Sophie, displaying the perceptiveness that often surprised them, gathered her art supplies. I just remembered, I have that history project to finish, in my room, where I should definitely be, right now. As their daughter's footsteps faded down the hall, Emma realized she'd thought of Sophie as their daughter, not just hers. The realization should have frightened her, but instead it felt right. Emma, Oliver said softly, his voice carrying more strength than she'd ever heard. Need to tell you. But before he could continue, Jenkins reappeared at the door, his usual composure shaken. Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but there's an urgent call from the Planning Commission. There's been a complaint filed against the Rehabilitation Center project. Someone with considerable influence is attempting to block the permits. Emma felt Oliver's hand tighten on hers. They'd come so far, overcome so much, only to face a new threat to their dreams. Yet as she looked at Oliver, she saw not defeat, but determination in his eyes. Whatever this new challenge was, they would face it together. What worried her more was what Oliver had been about to say before Jenkins's interruption. The intensity in his eyes had suggested something important, something that could change everything between them. Now, with this new crisis looming, would they ever find the right moment to acknowledge what they both felt? As if reading her thoughts, Oliver squeezed her hand gently. Later, he promised, his voice soft but certain. When ready. Emma nodded, pushing aside her personal feelings to focus on the immediate challenge. They had a project to save, and somewhere out there an unknown opponent working to destroy everything they'd built together. Chapter 10. Hidden Opposition. The identity of their opponent emerged during a tense meeting with the Planning Commission. Charles Blackwood, Victoria's father, sat among the commissioners, his grey eyes carrying the same calculated coolness his daughter had often displayed. The proposed location, he was saying, falls within a historically significant area. The architectural plans, while interesting, fail to consider the preservation guidelines established by the Heritage Council. Emma watched Oliver's fingers tap against his wheelchair's armrest, not from anxiety, but from growing anger. They'd spent weeks ensuring their plans met every guideline, every regulation. This opposition wasn't about preservation, it was personal. If I may, Emma stepped forward, spreading out their documentation. Our plans actually incorporate elements of the original Victorian architecture. The renovation preserves the historical facade while adapting the interior for modern therapeutic needs. Sophie, who had insisted on attending despite it being a school day, added her voice. We've designed special art spaces that highlight the original windows and archways. It's like giving the building a new purpose while honoring its past. Charles Blackwood's expression remained impassive, but Emma caught a flicker of something in his eyes when Sophie spoke. Recognition, perhaps, of the passion and thought behind their project. The committee will need time to review these additional materials, he announced. However, there are other concerns. The proposed art therapy program lacks traditional medical credentials. We must consider liability issues. Credentials? Oliver's voice, stronger now after weeks of therapy, carried across the room. With careful deliberation, he continued, Show them, Sophie. Sophie nervously approached the commissioners, carrying a large portfolio. Inside were before and after photographs of Oliver's progress, alongside documentary evidence of their therapeutic art sessions. But more compelling were the letters, dozens of them from parents of Sophie's classmates, local youth workers, and community members, all supporting the project. These young people, Oliver spoke again, each word chosen with care, need more than traditional methods, need hope, purpose. As the commissioners reviewed the materials, Emma noticed Charles Blackwood studying Oliver intently. The older man's facade cracked slightly, revealing something like reluctant admiration. During the committee's deliberation break, Charles approached their table. "Victoria told me about the hearing," he said quietly. "About your progress, Oliver. I didn't believe her." Oliver met his former almost father-in-law's gaze steadily. "People change," he managed, "when given chance." Charles glanced at Emma and Sophie, then back to Oliver. "Yes," he said thoughtfully, "they do." Without another word, he returned to the commissioners' table. When the committee reconvened, their decision was unexpected. Charles Blackwood himself announced that the project would receive conditional approval pending some minor adjustments to the historical preservation elements. As they left the meeting, spirits high with victory, Emma noticed Oliver watching her with that same intense expression from the night before. They had saved the project, but there was still something unresolved between them, something that needed to be said. "Sophie," Oliver called softly, "show commissioners garden plans?" Sophie, catching his meaning immediately, grinned and hurried back into the meeting room with their additional drawings, leaving Emma and Oliver alone in the quiet hallway. "Emma," he began, his voice stronger than ever. "Yesterday." Interrupted. Important words. Emma's heart began racing as Oliver reached for her hand. The touch was deliberate, certain, carrying months of unspoken feelings. "When accident happened," he continued slowly, "lost everything. Purpose, hope." His fingers tightened on hers. "You, Sophie, gave back more, gave love." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Emma felt tears threatening to spill as Oliver pressed on, determination carrying him through each careful word. Not carer anymore, partner, family, if want. Before Emma could respond, Sophie burst back into the hallway, excitement overriding her usual perceptiveness. "Mum!" "Mr. Montgomery, they love the garden plans. They want to see more details about the therapeutic landscaping and—" She stopped abruptly, finally noticing their joined hands and emotional expressions. Oh, should I go back inside?" Oliver smiled at the girl who had become so dear to him. "Sophie," he said carefully, "need your opinion about family." Sophie's eyes widened as she understood the real question being asked. She looked between them, her face breaking into a radiant smile. "I thought you'd never ask. I mean, technically you haven't actually asked yet, but—" Emma laughed through her tears, squeezing Oliver's hand. "He was getting to that part, love." The hallway filled with their shared laughter, Oliver's rough but genuine, Sophie's bright and excited, Emma's soft and full of joy. They had faced opposition and overcome it together. Now, with their project secured and their feelings finally in the open, they could begin planning not just a rehabilitation center, but a future as a family. What none of them noticed was Charles Blackwood watching from the meeting room doorway, a gentle smile softening his usually stern features. Perhaps he thought his daughter had been right about changes and new beginnings. Chapter 11. Healing Steps. Spring arrived at the mansion, bringing with it new beginnings in more ways than one. The rehabilitation center's construction was well underway, its Victorian facade gleaming with fresh purpose. Inside Oliver's wing, an even more remarkable transformation was taking place. "Just a few more steps," Emma encouraged, her hands hovering near Oliver's waist as he gripped the parallel bars. Months of intensive physiotherapy had strengthened his upper body considerably, and now, with the help of innovative treatments and sheer determination, he was learning to walk again. Sophie sat at the end of the bars, sketching the scene before her. These moments of triumph had become part of her growing portfolio, a visual diary of their journey together. "You're doing brilliantly," she called out, her artist's eye capturing the determination in Oliver's expression. Each step was a battle, but Oliver's face showed no trace of defeat. "Wedding," he said, his speech now clear though still measured. Walking down aisle, Emma felt her heart flutter at the mention of their upcoming ceremony. The proposal had been simple but perfect. Oliver presenting her with an architect's drawing of their future home, complete with studios for both him and Sophie, and the words, "Will you build this life with me?" carefully printed at the bottom. "The invitations arrived this morning," Sophie mentioned, adding shading to her sketch. Jenkins is addressing them now. Even Mr. Blackwood's getting one. Charles Blackwood's transformation from opponent to supporter had surprised them all. After the Planning Commission meeting, he'd taken a genuine interest in the Rehabilitation Center project, offering his expertise in historical preservation and even suggesting additional funding sources. Oliver reached the end of the parallel bars, sweat beading on his forehead but satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. As Emma helped him into his wheelchair, now used more as a precaution than a necessity, he pulled her close. Practice. First dance, too. One step at a time, love, Emma laughed, but her eyes shone with pride and anticipation. The man before her had come so far from the bitter, isolated patient she'd first met. His determination had not only rebuilt his body, but had also created something beautiful from the broken pieces of all their lives. Later that afternoon, as Emma reviewed the final plans for the Rehabilitation Center's opening, she found Sophie sitting in the garden, unusually quiet. "Everything all right, darling?" she asked, settling beside her daughter. Sophie fiddled with her sketchbook. "I was thinking about the wedding, about taking Oliver's name. Both of us, I mean. If that's okay?" Emma's throat tightened with emotion. "Have you discussed this with him?" "Sort of," Sophie admitted. "He's been helping me with an art project, a family tree, but instead of looking back, it shows the future. Our future. And I drew all three of us with the same name." Before Emma could respond, they heard the soft whir of Oliver's wheelchair approaching. He'd been practicing using the garden paths as part of his mobility training. "Show her," Oliver encouraged Sophie, who carefully opened her sketchbook to reveal the family tree illustration. It was beautifully rendered, with 3 intertwined branches bearing their names: Oliver, Emma, and Sophie Montgomery. "Perfect," Oliver said simply, reaching for both their hands. Emma looked at her daughter, no longer the scared girl from the shelter, and the man who had helped them both find not just security, but joy. "Yes," she agreed. "Perfect." Their moment was interrupted by Jenkins clearing his throat discreetly. "Pardon the interruption, but the art therapy instructor candidates have arrived for their interviews." The Rehabilitation Center would open shortly after the wedding, combining traditional medical treatments with creative therapy programs. Oliver insisted on personally interviewing every potential staff member, ensuring they shared his vision of healing through art and innovation. As they made their way back inside, Oliver caught Emma's hand. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "Seeing me, when broken, helping build something new." Emma squeezed his hand, remembering the long journey from their first meeting to this moment. "We built it together," she corrected gently. "All 3 of us." Sophie ran ahead to greet the candidates, her natural enthusiasm brightening the hallway. Emma and Oliver followed more slowly, his steps careful but growing stronger each day. The mansion that had once felt like a prison to Oliver now buzzed with purpose and life, its rooms filled with plans for the future and the warmth of family. That evening, as they reviewed applications and discussed interview feedback, Emma watched Oliver and Sophie bent over the desk together, their heads close as they examined portfolio samples. The scene struck her with its simple rightness. This little family they'd created, born from broken pieces and built with love, understanding, and unwavering faith in each other's strength. Chapter 12. Full Circle. The Rehabilitation Center's grand hall had been transformed for the wedding. Sophie's artistic vision had guided the decorations, combining elegant simplicity with clever nods to their shared journey. Architectural drawings served as table runners, while easels displayed paintings created by future art therapy students. In a quiet room upstairs, Emma stood before a mirror, hardly recognizing herself in the elegant cream gown. Sophie, already dressed in her junior bridesmaid's dress, made final adjustments to her mother's hair. "Oliver's going to burst into tears when he sees you," Sophie declared confidently. Happy tears, obviously. A knock at the door revealed Charles Blackwood, looking distinguished in his morning suit. "The guests are seated," he announced, then hesitated. "Emma, I hope you'll accept my offering to walk you down the aisle. Consider it my way of welcoming you to the family properly." Emma felt tears threatening to ruin her careful makeup. "Thank you, Charles. That would be perfect." Meanwhile, in another room, Oliver stood steadily, Jenkins helping with his tie. Months of determination had paid off. He would walk down the aisle and dance with his bride, though a discreet wheelchair waited nearby if needed. "The ring, sir," Jenkins prompted gently. Oliver patted his pocket, smiling at the thoughtful design he'd commissioned. The band featured 3 intertwined strands of gold, representing their family's unity, with a small artist's palette charm that would rest against Emma's finger. The ceremony began with soft music, a string quartet playing an arrangement Sophie had helped select. Oliver made his way to the altar slowly but surely, each step a testament to his recovery and determination. When Emma appeared at the entrance, escorted by Charles Blackwood and followed by a beaming Sophie, Oliver felt his breath catch. She moved toward him with grace and certainty, her eyes never leaving his. As Charles placed her hand in Oliver's, the older man's usual stern expression softened with genuine emotion. The celebrant spoke of love's transformative power, of families built through choice rather than chance, and of the strength found in supporting each other through life's challenges. But the most powerful moment came during the personally written vows. Oliver spoke first, his voice clear and strong, though still measured. "Emma, you saw beyond my broken pieces to the man I could become again. You and Sophie brought light back into my world. Today I promise not just my love, but my partnership in all things. Together we'll continue building something beautiful from life's unexpected turns." Emma's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "Oliver, you taught me that strength comes in many forms and that love can rebuild what life breaks. I promise to stand beside you in all our adventures, to cherish the family we've created, and to never stop believing in the power of second chances." Sophie's surprise came during the ring exchange. Along with the wedding bands, she presented a small box containing a delicate gold necklace with a matching artist's palette charm. "For all 3 Montgomerys," she announced proudly. After the celebrant pronounced them husband and wife, Oliver drew Emma into a tender kiss. The guests burst into applause, but the newlyweds had eyes only for each other and for Sophie, who rushed to join their embrace. The reception celebrated not just their marriage, but the official opening of the rehabilitation center. Guests toured the facilities, admiring the seamless blend of historical architecture and modern healing spaces. The art therapy rooms buzzed with excitement, showcasing work from their first group of young clients. As evening fell, Oliver led Emma onto the dance floor. Their first dance had been carefully choreographed to accommodate his abilities, but what the guests saw was simply a man in love, holding his wife close as they swayed to the music. Sophie joined them halfway through, the 3 of them moving together in a dance that symbolized their journey from broken individuals to united family. Later, under a canopy of twinkling lights, Oliver stood at a microphone to make an announcement. The Rehabilitation Center's first major project would be a scholarship program for young artists facing physical or emotional challenges. The program would bear Sophie's name, honoring the young girl whose art had helped bridge the gap between injury and healing. As guests mingled and celebrated, Emma found a quiet moment with her new husband and daughter. They stood in the center's courtyard, admiring how the Victorian architecture glowed in the evening light. "Look what we built," Sophie said proudly, gesturing at the building and the happy crowds within. Oliver squeezed Emma's hand, his voice soft but full of joy. "No, darling. Look what we're building. This is just the beginning." Emma leaned into her husband's strength, drew her daughter close, and knew with absolute certainty that he was right. Their story hadn't ended with healing or even with marriage. It was continuing to unfold page by page, drawing by drawing, step by step, into a future bright with possibility and love. In the distance, a shooting star streaked across the summer sky, and Sophie made a wish. But looking at her parents, at the love and pride shining in their eyes, she realized she didn't need wishes anymore. Everything she'd ever dreamed of was right here. In this moment, in this family they'd built together,